Welcome to this edition of Opinion Central. I'm John Diaz, the editorial page editor for the Chronicle. As part of our continuing series with major candidates for the June 5th election, we have with us today John Chiang, California State Treasurer, former controller, and now candidate for governor of California. Welcome, John.
Happy to be here, John.
And also with me is Lois Kaskop, deputy editorial page editor at the Chronicle. John just met with the editorial board. We went over a number of issues, but let me start, if I could, with the question that I asked you at the beginning of our other meeting. What are the issues that distinguish you from your major contenders in the June 5th election?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the approach is important. So what I try to bring in my public service is, number one, being trustworthy. Do you get the job done on the critical issues? I'm the only person who has served in all three financial offices in California, stood up when it was tough. 2008, 2009 financial crisis, people were attacking and making fun of California, exercising their envy. But I stood up to the governor and legislature, helped lead California through. With the great leadership with the current governor, we've gotten out of a cash deficit, gotten out of budgetary deficit, but we have much, much more work to do. Making sure that we bring integrity to the process. Character makes a big difference, and a record of fiscal expertise. Why does it matter? Because we're trying to support the dreams of every single Californian. And so, like my parents who were immigrants who came to this country, there are so many who want to make sure that their children get access to a world-class education. Every child, regardless of community, ought to have that. But if the state isn't doing its, fulfilling its responsibilities, if, like we did during that recession, owed $10 billion to local school districts, kids aren't getting what they need. When the state's in a bad financial position and local government's in a bad financial position, you have what we have today in the Bay Area, where you have a housing crisis, where people are paying $3,400 a month in rent, where 1 in 5 Californians, when you adjust for transportation and housing, live in poverty. That's not acceptable. And this area is, a stellar star internationally for its innovation. So I've worked very hard to make sure that we invest in that next generation of innovation economy, AI, clean and green technology. We need to make sure that our brilliant academic institutions, Cal, UCSF, Stanford, continue to educate our students, and they can work here and continue to create that next generation of genius.
You talked in the meeting about education, and I brought up the fact that a lot of our school districts are in really big trouble. They're facing bankruptcy because of rising pension costs and also healthcare costs. How would you help that? People just can't imagine having their schools closed because they're bankrupt.
Yeah, that's a very profound and important question. When I was the state controller, I was responsible for disclosing those healthcare obligations. I did it earlier than when required under government accounting rules, because I think it's important to trust our people, to trust the process, to have people come together and make those difficult decisions. Because for too often, people hide the ball or they kick the can down the road. You see it here in local jurisdictions where that OPEB funding, I know that's technical, it's the healthcare obligations, weren't being paid. And we don't want the beneficiaries, when they retire, not to have their healthcare funded. So I'll bring people together, as I have in Sacramento. I have encouraged the current governor, and the current governor did go forward to say, let's negotiate to make sure we start paying our healthcare obligations. And then we're going to have to continue to make the tough decisions on the pensions, right? One of the things that I've been tough on is Wells Fargo, right? Because we had that big financial crisis that impacted the investment market, which really, it took down the performance of our returns by nearly a quarter. So we need to make sure that we have take action to take risk off the table for our pension plans, but also hold companies accountable so that they don't engage in bad practices.
One of the issues that has emerged in this as a dividing line for Democrats, not only this election but statewide, is single payer. Gavin Newsom and Delaney Easton have pretty much come out foursquare for going for a single payer, in other words, government-paid healthcare system in very short order. You've been more skeptical. Why?
Oh, well, I support single payer. My parents come from Taiwan, and they have a single payer system. But we just talked about 2008, 2009 financial crisis and healthcare obligations.
Yeah.
and I believe if you're going to go forward with the system, you have to be honest with people. How are we going to pay for it? What services are you going to get? You can't promise pie in the sky and not show the dollar on how to pay for it. So that's where I am. Let's talk about what services we're going to provide, and I want to support the continuation and perhaps expansion of the services under Obamacare. I'd like to grow our services so that everybody is covered, but we have to be honest with the people of California how much it's going to cost, how much money we have today, whether it's state contributions, how much will we continue to get from the federal government, so then we can decide how much of that we can cover.
How long do you think that deliberative process would take? In other words, if you are elected governor, do you think it's plausible that we could move towards single payer in your first term or second term, or maybe much longer than that?
We will push the process, but if we have the same leadership in Washington, D.C., it's going to be incredibly problematic. We know that Washington, D.C., whether it's immigration, whether it's cannabis, whether it's healthcare, whether it's offshore oil drilling, they have different values than we have here in California. So clearly, they're not going to make it easy on California. If we have a supportive administration, I'd love to see it happen in the first term.
Let's talk a little bit about cannabis. Every county saying, oh, we're going to be able to do this because of the cannabis taxes. And so far, those taxes are not as robust as maybe promised. How would you deal with that? What are you going to tell the people of California?
Well, we have to be straightforward and upfront. When they passed Proposition 64, the authors failed to address a couple of critical issues. What you just talked about, taxes. They didn't address tax administration. So here you have the Board of Equalization that was responsible for collecting the sales tax, and you had board members that had different philosophies. Fiona Ma, who represents this area, was the most receptive, saying, yes, the Board of Equalization districts will collect cannabis dollars, right, certain hours, certain offices. George Runner, a conservative Republican, was supportive, not as flexible in regards to those collection. And then you had representatives from Southern California, one representing principally the Los Angeles area, one representing an area further south that said no. So you had legal businesses that wanted to comply, wanted to bring forward and pay their taxes, and their tax administration agency said no. A second major area that was failed to be addressed was the banking. And so as State Treasurer, I convened an 18-member working group, Department of Justice, representatives of the cannabis industry, representatives of the financial industry, government regulators. We came up with 4 recommendations, looking into a state bank, which we're doing today in the State Treasurer's office, creating a consortium that we're working on. We're partnering with other national organizations, state organizations, other state treasurers, and other officials. We want to push upon the Attorney General, the Trump administration, Congress, to try to get some movement there. And then a couple other ideas.
Probably the number one issue right now for a lot of Bay Area residents is housing, because not only is it an affordability issue for a lot of families, it's inextricably tied with homelessness, certainly, with transportation issues when people have to move to distant areas to commute, family values, quality of life. What role do you think the state can have in solving the housing crisis, for example, here in the Bay Area? Could there be regulatory relief, reform of the California Environmental Quality Act? Do you see, can the state provide money? What role would the state have?
Yeah, the state is going to have to take a much larger role. When you build affordable housing, as we discussed, there are multiple parties: the federal government, state government, local government. And we know that the federal government has been pulling back support, especially the recent pronouncements talking about a dramatic decline in federal funding for housing, which is going to make it much more problematic, which means the state's going to have to step up its action. As state treasurer, in my inaugural speech, I said housing is going to be one of my top priorities. I did a statewide tour of nonprofit, for-profit, developers, builders, others, the social service agencies. By my second year in office, we increased the financing of more affordable housing by over 80%. But as governor, I will continue to push on those efforts. I push to bring another consortium together to push a $6 to $9 billion bond package. The legislature and a governor agreed on a $4 billion bond package, which I want to encourage California voters to vote for. But we need more of that because the state needs to provide support. So general funding support, yes, and some of those other regulations. And I would bring back to local governments redevelopment agencies. During that financial crisis, those redevelopment agencies were lost to local governments. That for many, it was their principal funding tool to build affordable housing. So I want to reestablish the foundation by which building more affordable housing is possible in California.
And how would you prevent the abuses of redevelopment? Would they come in and take people's private homes and sell them to other private people?
Yes, we have to have much better rules and regulations. I was the one who did the review that looked at the abuses of redevelopment agencies when they were contemplating eliminating it. So, we did a review of 30 plus agencies. We looked at, there are about abuses in 18 of them. So for instance, there was a city, a very wealthy city in Southern California that labeled its entire city a redevelopment agency, right? That's terrible. There was another redevelopment agency that spent a good chunk of money on a 4.5-star golf resort trying to improve it. That's not a good use, right? Those monies are to be used for very important economic development programs, and so those are the type of programs we're going to say you're not going to invest in the future iteration of redevelopment agencies.
Well, thank you so much, John Chiang. I'm going to look forward to seeing you on May 8th down in San Jose. The Silicon Valley Community Foundation is going to be hosting a debate. It's going to be televised statewide on NBC with Chuck Todd moderating. I'll be on the panel. We'll look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
So thanks so much for joining us, Lois Kazikoff, and also thanks to our executive producer, Brittany Schell, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Opinion Central.